family of computer software. In addition to ArcGIS, published by Esri, there is an open source version as well, which we don't really get any practice with in this course, but there are some free and completely open applications that you can do GIS with, such as QGIS. There's also things like Mapbox, which is more involved in GIS for mobile application development and web development. We can also think of it as a collection of computer hardware. So a geographic information system can also consist of the actual computer you are using to work with data. Remember, a computer could be considered your smartphone as well. Your mobile device, it could be the GPS unit you're using to collect data in the field, precision survey equipment, etc. What we'll work with in ArcGIS Online today fits into that third bullet there. It's a service that is distributed and accessed via the internet. So one of the advantages of a service is that you can upload data and you can work on it collaboratively with a team. You can distribute it to anyone in the world very easily without having to send them the actual data itself. You can build mobile applications on top of it, etc. It's also can be considered a tool for answering spatial questions. Remember, we went through different types of spatial questions last time. It's a system in that all these things work together, right? And you are actually a critical component of the system. And then it's also a science, right? Understanding how to best answer the spatial questions, how to frame the spatial questions. There's even some aspects of what's the best way to display the data. What's the science of clearly communicating this data as well? And more. So if we think about the system hardware, we're thinking about computer memory, storage, scanners. It's kind of old school, but probably still relevant in some cases. Printers, GPS, etc. And we can maintain, analyze, share, collaborate on a bunch of different data and information. So what are some of the key characteristics of GIS maps? One of the essential things about GIS maps is that they are layered. So your strategy for answering spatial questions typically involves layering different pieces of information on top of each other. So this, for example, is a map of the United States. The base map here is a digital elevation model that's colored based on the elevation values. On top of that, we have polygon layers that show us the area where we have coal basins. These are energy resources in the United States, right? Places where people are mining coal. Notice that quite a few are located close to us here in eastern Montana. We've got a line layer that shows us transmission lines. This could be used to convey electricity between different power stations, of course, and power stations and where people live. And then we also have a point layer here showing us locations where electricity is being generated. So we could assume, based on the context of this map, that these are likely the locations of coal-fired power plants in the United States. I wanted to show this because this map has all three different types of features on the map. So features include things that fall into the categories of polygons, lines, or points. And the nature of the feature that you're trying to map will really dictate which of these data structures you choose. Right? Coal-fired power plants, you could theoretically display that with a polygon. You could actually map the boundaries of the buildings. But that might not be the best strategy for displaying that data at the scale of this map, right, where we can view the entire extent of the continental United States, the conterminous United States. So I mentioned that term feature versus surface. The key thing that distinguishes a feature from a surface is that a feature is a discrete object. It has a spatial extent. It does not extend across the entire map. And again, features include point data, polygon data, and line data. Here's another example of a map that shows us some features. These are earthquakes and the location of subduction zones, which are a geological feature where one tectonic plate is being shoved beneath another one. Earthquakes can be related to subduction zones because slip across those geological features creates that seismic activity. So we've got points here that are colored based on the date of the earthquake, and then they're actually scaled based on the magnitude of the earthquake. And then lines are showing us the location of these geological features that have more of a linear character to them. A surface is like the image you see on the right here. You've seen tons of these, right? This is a map showing us elevation data. We would call this a colorized DEM. Or if we're thinking about the oceans, we would call this a bathymetric map. I'll have another slide where it's actually spelled out, but bathymetry is essentially elevation data below sea level. And the way these surfaces work is that they are continuous across the entire map. And if we really zoomed in on this, what you would see is that the surface is comprised of individual pixels, and those pixels also have attribute values. So if we zoomed way into the ocean floor here, we can see a place where there's a depression in the ocean. We have a relatively deep bathymetric feature here. We zoom much further in and we can see individual cells which are tied to a numerical value. That numerical value is what controls the color that that cell takes on. That's what actually creates the image itself. It's pretty similar to a picture you would take on your camera, right? So who can tell me what the numerical data would be for a pixel on a picture you took with your camera? Anyone want to take a guess at that? Yes, in the back. Yeah, so it's like it's a set of 3 numerical values in that case, RGB, and when you mix red, blue, and green together, it creates a color. So that's one way of displaying a surface, right? Another way is to say, hey, these are going to be numerical values that actually correspond to a measured feature on the Earth, like how deep you are below sea level, and then we can choose a color to represent the range of values in your data set as well. Just backing up a little bit, this map of earthquakes, we also have attributes that are tied to these features as well. So if you clicked on one of these points, you could bring up the magnitude of the earthquake, and you can use that magnitude, which is a numerical value, to control, how big we draw that symbol, what color we draw that symbol. We can choose to have different symbols tied to different attributes as well, right? If we say this is a strike slip earthquake, we could use a triangle to represent that. A dip slip earthquake, we could use a circle to represent that. And unless you're a geology major, don't worry about those 2 terms. So the attributes actually look like an Excel table. So hopefully you've all used Excel at one point in your life. If not, you'll get more comfortable working with spreadsheets in this course. But each individual row in one of these data tables will be tied to a spatial feature in a GIS. So here, for example, is a map showing country boundaries. We could select Brazil and then pull up the attribute table for Brazil and read off the attribute values. We have a number of different fields here. The first will be a default object ID field. This is a field that just has a unique identifier for each feature that is on the map. We'll have a field that tells us what type of shape it is. And you can only store one type of shape in each individual layer. So you'll always see all polygon or all line or all point. And then we have the attribute values that are controlled by the user. So we could either manually input these data, we could transform a spreadsheet of data you found on the internet, etc. You could bring in US Census data. But we can see here things like the country name is Brazil, We can have a longer name here. Federative Republic of Brazil, population, square miles in terms of area, etc. So let's just compare and contrast those two types of spatial data. Right? Features are tied to specific locations, whereas surfaces extend across the entire map. And you can't really describe the location of a surface using one set of coordinates or one address. Data are tied to specific features in a feature layer, whereas in a surface, the data is tied to individual cells. And we can actually control how many cells there are based on the resolution, right? A higher resolution data set will have many more cells, and each individual cell will be smaller. One term we could use to describe a feature is that they are discrete, whereas a surface is continuous. And right, features, as I mentioned, have points, lines, polygons, and something I haven't shown you yet, but does exist in GIS is 3D objects as well. Any questions? All right, so one of the cool things we can do with this attribute data is that we can perform queries, which is a fancy way of saying kind of selecting data based on the attribute values to select features we want to work with or analyze in our data set, or control how they are symbolized to show them in a different color, etc. So we can write a query to say, hey, show me a map of only the countries that are in Asia. So to do that, we would need a field that said maybe continent, and then we could select all of the rows that have the attribute value Asia. If we had another field that had population in there, we could say, also show me the countries in Asia that have a population greater than 5 million people. That would narrow down our map to China and India. We could also do things like show me only the capital cities in Asia for these countries with 5 million people. There are many different ways to approach querying or subsetting your data in a GIS, and we'll learn all about those in this class. And then we'll talk a little bit about future GIS in this course. One of the exciting things is just the vast amount of data that is available to us. For example, here, this is from a few years ago. These are geotagged tweets within the last year or so in 2018. Even this slide is getting out of date because it's no longer called Twitter, of course. And you can no longer scrape data using an API, an application programming interface, because Elon Musk happened. But anyways, tons of data. Anything that is tied to a spatial location can be considered future GIS. There are programming languages to deal with this. There's lots of really exciting new tools built into software platforms like ArcGIS Pro. So the possibilities on the horizon are really, really limitless. Cool. So this would be a good time, if you have your device with you today, to load up a web browser and go to arcgis.com and attempt to sign in. I just had one of those experiences where I updated my slides yesterday and I must not have saved them on my other computer, so there's like 3 slides that I wanted to show you, but they're missing. That's okay. We can do it next time. Cool. So for the rest of the class today, I really wanted to give you an overview of ArcGIS Online. And just to give you a little historical background, this course used to be entirely in the desktop software, and that's because the online capabilities were really kind of primitive just a few years ago. But what I've seen throughout the past 6 years I've been teaching this course is that ArcGIS Online is really becoming the dominant way that people actually use GIS. It has a number of advantages, and it's really, it's web native. It starts and finishes in the cloud environment on the internet. And when people are looking to create web maps, it makes sense to just start that entire process in ArcGIS Online. Most of your lab exercises are going to be on the desktop software. That's because there are things you can do in desktop that you can't do in ArcGIS Online. But my goal in the lecture portion is to introduce you to a lot of the cool things you can do in ArcGIS Online. As a reminder, you will be doing a semester-long project called a story map project, and that'll all take place in ArcGIS Online. So you're getting a little two-pronged approach here. A lot of online stuff in lecture, more desktop stuff in lab. Raise your hand if you've managed to log in to ArcGIS Online. Awesome. Anyone have any questions? Anything I can help you with? In the back, do you have a question? Are you good? Cool. So I just want to give you a tour of ArcGIS Online. This gallery tab at the top here, this will show you a whole bunch of things that have been created and saved in your organization. There are 3 different levels of sharing. When you're creating features or creating maps, sharing data in ArcGIS Online, the default is something that is just available to you. The next level up is to share with anyone who's a member of your organization, so anyone who can log into the Spatial Sciences Center at MSU. So for instance, if you are turning in your homework to me or your lab TAs, you need to share your data to the organization. And then the third level is public sharing, which means that anyone can actually access your work and look at it. So you want to be careful with that. If you're sharing something publicly, you want to make sure it's a finalized product. It has good descriptions of what the data are and the limitations, etc. The next 2 tabs are interfaces for actually working with maps in ArcGIS Online. So if we click on Map, it brings up something called the Map Viewer. Just has a default view of the United States, shows us a base map, and it has a bunch of different tools that are arranged along the left side and the right side of the screen. You will also notice this link here called Map Viewer Classic. Map Viewer Classic is something that used to be the Map Viewer product, but it's been updated to the new Map Viewer. You will find that some people who use ArcGIS all the time prefer Map Viewer Classic. In this course, I'm going to teach in the new Map Viewer because it has the most, it's basically the most current version. This can be considered more of a legacy version of the map. Options are in different places, but just so you know what that is. I would encourage you to spend most of your time in the Map Viewer. If we click that back button, you'll also see this link up here that says Scene. Scene is very similar to a map, except it's designed for 3-dimensional rendering. So if you have any 3D objects, you would want to use a scene instead of a map. So let's open up an example here. This looks pretty cool, mountain biking in Bavaria. Looks kind of like Google Earth, right? Maybe Onyx Maps, Strava, FatMap, things of that nature, which are really optimized for displaying data in 3D. But otherwise, looks kind of similar to Map Viewer, right? We still have the options on the left side here. a number of different tools, etc. All right, we can back out of that. Groups. So this is really useful if you are working on a project with a group of people and you want to be able to share data with just those people, right? This is actually kind of a subset of organizations sharing. So for instance, I'm working with the Big Sky Ski Patrol right now to create a web application where they can track where they've actually done avalanche control. A couple grad students working with me on this. And so I've created a group where my grad students are members of this group, and we can share our development versions of the app and the spatial data before we're sharing it publicly or with people outside of our organization. So groups are cool. Content is where you're going to find all of your items you have created in ArcGIS Online. You can create folders on the left side. There are a whole bunch of different things that you can save in here. Right, feature layers, you might have a sense of what that is. We just talked about what a feature is. So these are individual map layers I've created. A web map is a file that points to those layers and tells the map viewer how to actually symbolize and display them. And there's other things called web experiences or web applications, which are sort of streamlined ways of viewing maps that might be good for sharing a map product with the public. Questions so far? All right. So I mentioned last time, or I gave you that introduction that included a description of John Snow's Cholera map. So what we're going to do today is hopefully you've all managed to find that link that I put out in Teams and on D2L. We want to click that link to open up the map that shows us a more modern representation of that historic map by John Snow. So let me go find that. I put it in lecture content. There is also a tutorial which walks you through a few steps. This will be useful if you want to go back to this and look at the steps, practice them on your own, but I'll kind of walk you through them today. But just go ahead and click this link. And it will open up this map. One other thing I want to kind of emphasize here, it's very useful when you become more of an advanced user of ArcGIS Online, is that every asset in ArcGIS Online has a unique identification. You can see that up here in the browser's address bar. Right, so every individual web map you save will have its own unique ID, every individual layer, etc. You can find that information in the browser's address bar. All right, so raise your hand if you're able to open this map. Awesome. Anyone having any issues? Any questions? Great. So who can tell me what kind of layer we are looking at on the screen right now? Is it a feature or a surface? I hear some people saying, yeah, a feature. Well, so why do you say feature? Yeah, and I appreciate you being willing to answer the question because this one's kind of tricky. Actually, this is a surface, but the surface is being used in a strange way. It's being used to show us features on using a surface, right? It's kind of a tricky one because this is actually a scanned image of a map that someone made by hand. So they represented features on the map by hand drawing them, and we actually scanned this and uploaded it as a base map. So if we were able to zoom way in on this, we'd see individual pixels, and the only thing the pixels are storing in this case is RGB values. Or in this case, it might be a grayscale color scheme, right? Just black, gray, and white. So sorry, threw a trick question out there for you. But this is actually a surface. It's continuous across the extent of that surface. It's not tied to any individual location. It's essentially a scan of a map. We talked about what this is showing last time. And one of the cool things here is that we've actually tied this map to locations on the globe. So we've taken a hand-drawn map and we've said, this location on the picture actually corresponds to a set of coordinates in the top left side, bottom right, etc. So the first thing I want you to do is actually go over here to your layers. So on that black bar on the left side, second button down is layers. And this is where we control what is actually being displayed on the map. And if you hover over the layer that's called Snow's Cholera Map, we can just turn it on and off. So let's turn it off. And then one of the things we can do is go back to the left side here, go down 2 buttons to the button that says Base Map. And one of the cool things about ArcGIS Online is that we have a bunch of different base maps built in. The default for this map was set to the light gray canvas, which can be really great for not distracting from the other layers on the map. We have a whole bunch of different choices here. So let's choose Modern Antique Map. This gives us kind of a historical feel, right? We could also choose Imagery Hybrid, kind of like Google or Apple Maps. We can take a look at what it looks like today, choose a topographic map, etc. One of my favorites is called the Human Geography Map. This is a map that's really good for displaying layers and not distracting from them because it has a nice light gray color scheme on there. Well, I'm sort of like, you see me looking back and forth because all these building outlines are completely invisible on my computer monitor. Like I just can't see them, which is strange. So remember, your hardware can affect how a map appears to various different users. All right, so let's go back to the light gray canvas, and we'll go back to that layers, and we can go ahead and turn on that base map. We actually have 2 base maps here, right? We have the one that's built into ArcGIS Online, and then we have a scanned image, which is a surface that we're using as a second base map. One of the things we might want to do is actually control the transparency. So if we select that cholera map in the table of contents, it'll pull up some tools on the right side over here. The tools that get pulled up depend on what type of layer you've actually selected. Notice here that the values of our surface just range from 0 to 255. It's actually just a brightness value. So that's consistent with the grayscale colors. We could actually set a transparency. So if you wanted to, you can make it 50% transparent. Allows us to see through to whatever is underneath that image. For this exercise, I'm actually going to leave it at 0. One of the other things you can control is which zoom level these things display at. So notice it disappears when I zoom out. It reappears and then it disappears again. Right, so depending on the resolution of your image, you might want to change that. So let's change it to allow me to zoom all the way in on this image. Doesn't actually work because of the way the server stores this base map, but we can actually deal with that later. Questions so far? Cool. So lots of capabilities on the left side, and what we would refer to as contextual tools on the right side. This idea of a contextual menu is very important in GIS. You'll find it also happens a lot on desktop. It means that whatever you've selected has sort of a unique set of tools associated with what you've selected, and those tools kind of change depending on the nature of the data you're working with. One final thing before we work with those other layers. One very useful tool is this information button, Show Properties. It'll pull up the properties on the right side pane here. And if we expand this information, it has a link to a page where it describes the actual feature you are mapping. In this case, we've gone to the server information page for this particular layer, and you can find a lot of information about the feature on your map here. We can see the extent of the image. We can see the spatial reference information, all types of things that will be useful when you start doing more advanced things in ArcGIS Online. Here's actually a description of what this is, right? This is John Snow's map of deaths from the Broad Street cholera outbreak in the Soho district of London in 1854. We get some use limitations here. All of this information about the spatial features on your map would be referred to as metadata. Let me actually spell that for you. M-E-T-A-D-A-T-A, just metadata. And that term simply means data about the data. So again, if you ever want to see metadata, find the information, click on that link, see what kind of information is provided for that individual layer. Okay, so let's add some features on top of here. So we have two more layers. One is called cholera cases, and the other is called water pumps. Note that we can drag these layers around to reorder them. So what I just did is I took that cholera cases layer and I put it underneath Snow's cholera map. And of course, now we can't see it anymore. That's because we have a surface blocking it, right? So either we would need to rearrange the order in which these layers are drawn, or we would need to go back to the cholera map and make it transparent. In this case, it's definitely best to leave that cholera map on the bottom. All right, so if you highlight cholera cases, who can tell me what type of data that this is? Is it point, line, or polygon? Did I hear a point somewhere? Raise your hand if you think point. Awesome, yeah, point is correct. Water pumps is also going to be the same. So as I mentioned, the contextual menus, right? Let's highlight cholera cases and look at what we have available to us. We have properties, which are the tools I've already shown you for the other continuous surface layer. But now we have some new options like styles. So let's choose styles here. This is where we're going to be able to control how you symbolize the data. So we're going to ignore the choose attributes part right away. But currently we can look at how this layer is being displayed. It's just using a single symbol to show you only location information. The symbol is an orange dot, has a little bit of a transparency to it. But we might want to actually use a better visualization technique to actually answer our spatial question, right? The thing that John Snow was trying to get at with this map was, where are the highest concentrations of cholera? So let's select a heat map visualization instead. And now we get these little hotspots where we have a higher concentration of points. And it starts to reveal some trends in our data, specifically that there's a cluster of cases that seem to be centered around this particular water pump. We can also click on these layers to pull up the attribute values. You can see the name, the unique identifier, etc. We could go into options here. We could change our color ramp, right? There's a whole bunch of different options. We can make things more pink. I'm just going to leave it at the default. We can control the area of influence, which kind of controls the radius of the heat map, or how blended these features can be together. We can soften the edges, we can unsoften the edges, etc. So when you're happy with your symbolization of the cholera cases, you can just go ahead and click on Done. One of the drawbacks of the heat map visualization is it's kind of hard to tell where individual points are exactly. You're kind of just clicking in a region, whereas our previous location-based symbology really does show us a point where exactly that data is tied to. There's also something called blend modes in ArcGIS Online. It displays how features are blended together when they are displayed on the screen. We might want to choose a blend mode to actually make our visualization more effective. For example, I can darken my heat map to make it pop a little bit better. We can lighten it if we wanted to. I don't think that looks very good. Let's try multiply, right? Whole bunch of different options here. I think my first instinct was probably the best, right? Darken. Let's go to water pumps and let's choose a symbol that is a better representation of what we're actually mapping. This P here, you might take a look at that and say, okay, P stands for pump. When I look at that map, I think parking garage. So maybe you thought the same thing. If we actually click on the symbol style, you can pull up a gallery of shapes that are built into ArcGIS Online. So we might want to choose government here. We can scroll through the government symbols we have available to us. I think there's one for water in here. For example, I can choose this water droplet symbol, but of course there's a whole bunch of different options as well. Points of interest. Another thing you can do if you really want to customize your map is you can upload your own symbols. So if you're good with graphic editing, you can create a symbol, something like a TIFF file or a PNG file. You can upload it directly in here and use that to map features on your maps. All right, then we're almost out of time today, but what I want to show you one more thing, which is for any of these layers, you can control what is shown on those pop-ups by going over to the pop-up button on the right side when you have one of the feature layers selected. A little bit complicated to figure out what's going on here, but essentially you have a list of content that is going to be displayed in your pop-ups. And whenever you see these curly brackets around some text, that means it's actually getting some text from a field or an attribute value associated with the feature on the map. So in this case, it's getting the name. We can add a little context to that. We can say pump, like water pump name. And you'll see this actually update. We can also go to the fields list and select which of our attribute fields are going to be displayed. So there's only 3 available to us, but right, not very professional to have these 2 random object ID things in here. We might want to remove these. We can actually get rid of all of them because we already have the name and the title here. We could add some content, add some text, say These are pumps that were being investigated by John Snow, and the object ID is, hit a curly Q bracket to pull up your fields, close that bracket, hit OK, and your text will be on the pop-up. Final thing is that you might want to save this to your ArcGIS Online workspace. So if you have signed in, you'd have the option to save this. This window didn't allow me to sign in, but if you want to sign in and save your work so far, feel free to hit this save button, save it, and then there will also be some options to share it as well. All right, thanks everyone. I'll see you on Thursday. Hey there, let me just stop recording. How's it going?